cloud.
Yes.
And then hit webinar, start webinar.
Yep.
Okay, I'm doing it now.
Excellent.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. We're going to give it just another couple of minutes to let everybody in. 500 people have signed up for this session, so let's give them some time. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to the session, Coping with Stress and Anxiety During Uncertainty and Avoiding Burnout. And for as popular as this is, I hope it's not because everybody's burnt out. That's my hope. But welcome. We're going to be sharing a lot of techniques and tools and ideas and concepts. So welcome into the room, everybody. My name is Zander. I'll be introducing myself in just another couple minutes. I'm going to wait for more people to come in. So I'm going to give it about 2, maybe 3 minutes before I officially start. So we're just at about 100 people in the room. 500 people are signed up. So let's give them some time to get into the room. I appreciate you being here. I hope you've had a good summit so far. It's been many, many years since I've been to a summit. Back in the mid-2000s, when I was an Out and Equal employee, I did go to 2 summits, one in Chicago and one in Washington, D.C. Very, very good times. I loved working for the organization. So I'm happy to see you here at the summit and also at my session. Going to give it some more time. People are still slowly coming in. Just at about 140 people now. We have 500 people signed up. So it's only 1 minute past 6. So I appreciate your patience. You can, what you can do is you can take the time to maybe do some stretching, maybe stand up, do some limb shaking. It's a good stress management technique to shake your arms out and shake your legs out and shake your body, just sort of get that energy moving around your body. It's just good for releasing stress and might even make you laugh, which is also good for stress release. Might have been a very hectic day for you, stressful day. So while we're waiting for people to come in, go ahead and maybe take a moment, grab something to drink, maybe run to the bathroom really quickly if you need to. I'm going to give it 1 more minute. As soon as my clock says 6:03, I am going to start. So we've got about 160 people in the room now. 500 have signed up. So Zoom is letting people in very slowly. So once it hits 6:03 on my computer clock, I will go ahead and start. So I appreciate your patience. I'm also very thankful that you're here and that you want to learn more about coping with stress and anxiety. So it says 6:03 on my clock, so I'm going to go ahead and start. So hello, everybody. Welcome to my session, Coping with Stress and Anxiety During Uncertainty and How to Avoid Burnout. My name is Zander Keig. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Just start with a quick little disclaimer, right? So this session is for educational purposes only. It's not intended to be a substitute for any professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment you have received from a medical provider or a behavioral health specialist. So please contact any provider that you are currently working with. Don't ever disregard any medical or mental health advice or any treatment plan that you're under. If you find that something I'm saying is counter to what you've heard from them or something you might want to add into your treatment, please talk with them first after the presentation. So again, I am a licensed clinical social worker, but for the purposes of this session, this is for educational purposes only. Thank you, everybody. So a little bit more about me. Again, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a military veteran. My background is primarily working in the veteran and military space. And I'm currently, though, working more in consultation and coaching and webinar facilitation. So really the kind of work that I'm going to be doing with you tonight is the kind of work that I do in my quote day job now as a freelance coach and facilitator. So this is what I do now. I love what I do. I've been working from home since March 13th of 2020, like probably a lot of you. I'm the family caregiver for my 80-year-old father who has dementia. And I mention all these things and you'll see why as we go through. These are some of the things that adds to stress in my life. right? And uncertainty in my life and anxiety in my life. So I'm not immune from any of these things. So I'm not here to tell you how to do this, and I don't know that I need to practice it myself. So I want to be really clear on that. I gain from these kinds of workshops every time I do them, because it reminds me of what I need to do to keep myself healthy and sane. So this is just a quick little overview of some of the things I'll be touching on within the next 55 minutes. We're going to be talking about how to identify and manage stress, how to deal with difficult thoughts, how to cope with strong emotions, how to cultivate a better work-family balance if that's something you need, how to establish healthy boundaries. We'll talk more about that. That's typically an area that people really look forward to gaining some skills in, is setting healthy boundaries. And then for those of you who are parents, caregivers, care providers, care partners, I'll talk just a little bit towards the end about how we can have that work-life balance, especially when we are, people are depending on us for their well-being and their care. So that's just a little bit. There's more, of course, but this is just an overview of what I'll be talking about. I'm going to be asking questions throughout. So a slide will come up. It'll have a question on it. The next slide will be like that. And what I'm going to ask is that people use the chat box to answer, right? So don't unmute yourself. We're going to use the chat box for this so that we can move on more easily and more quickly. So here's the first question. You can send this to everyone, or you can click that little down caret and send it just to the host/panelist, so only I see it. But what are you struggling with most right now? What's most on your mind? What in your life is causing you the most anxiety or the most uncertainty? What's the one thing you're struggling with most right now? So put that into the chat box. Yeah, so people are talking about their, people in their family are sick, things about work, right? Issues with pets, with children, issues with housing, burnout, right? It's going by so quickly. So thank you so much, everybody, for what you're putting in there. People, a lot of overwhelm, burnout. There you go. Yeah. So a lot of different things going on for people. Some people are dealing with some medical issues, struggles at work. So yeah, and I saw burnout go past. So this is perfect, right? So thank you for sharing that. Sometimes, it's just part of the relief of the burden can sometimes be just sharing it, just getting it out there. Otherwise, a lot of us are isolated, right? And we're spending a lot of time alone, and we don't have people that we are connecting with, people who we can talk to and say, I'm feeling burned out, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling uncertain, I feel like my life is unraveling, however we frame it. So I want to say thank you for being here, and for putting your burdens into the chat box. So I'm gonna lead us through a breathing exercise, because this is a way for us to, one, all get grounded and centered and be here now. As hokey as that sounds, for those of you who are familiar with the Ram Dass, wisdom of the world. But there's some truth to when we can pay close attention to the present moment, and not judge ourselves for how we're doing it or not doing it, and we can breathe and we can calm ourselves. There's actually a lot of evidence that shows that not only does it manage stress, but it reduces stress and it increases our emotional resilience and our overall well-being. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to lead you through a breathing exercise where you can close your eyes, or just avert your eyes downwardly if you don't want to close them, or you can stare at me on your screen if you'd like and keep track of your breath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a focused breathing where I do some counting. And so I'm going to count you through breaths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use counting to the number 4. And what I'm going to say to you is, okay, hold your breath to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I'll do it a little bit more slowly. And then I'm going to ask you to inhale to the count of 4, and then to hold your breath again to the count of 4, then exhale to the count of 4, and then hold again after you've released all your breath to the count of 4. So, and this is something you can do on your own. This is called boxed breathing. This is a breathing technique that's used with the Navy SEALs. So, you know, talk about a stressful day job. So let's go ahead then and get comfortable, get relaxed. Please sit down. I don't want you to lose your balance and fall over, or lay down if that's more comfortable. And let's go ahead and, so everybody exhale so that your lungs and your belly is empty of breath. Do that now, and then hold it for 1, 2, 3, 4. Now inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold your breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold again for 4 with the empty breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold your breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. And exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, that's called box breathing. You can look it up online. I'd love to see in the chat box, how do you feel right now? How was that breathing exercise for you? Did it work? Didn't it work? Do you feel more calm, more frustrated? How did it work for you? Breathing exercises. There's a bunch of them. So if you don't like that one, do an internet search on breathing exercises and find one that does work for you. Consciously taking in breath and working with your breath is very, very good for stress relief. So talking about stress, our body has an automatic response to stress. It's just what it does. We want it to do that, right? Our limbic brain system is a detection system for danger and security risks and safety risks. And so we want our body to respond, right? And we want to validate our body for doing what it's supposed to do, which is alerting us. And it alerts us in all these different ways. Our pupils dilate, our saliva starts to overproduce, right? We start to perspire, our heart rate might increase, our breathing might become shallow, right? Internally, our blood vessels are changing, and our blood pressure might go up. So our body is responding, because what it's doing is it's getting us ready for the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Most people are unfamiliar with fawn as one of the 4 F's of stress response. It's getting us ready to do one of these 4 things, right? We're either going to fight whomever or whatever is coming at us, real or not, right? Perceived or real. We're gonna flee from it, right? We're gonna run away from it. We're gonna freeze, right? We're gonna play possum, right? Play dead. We're gonna pretend like nothing's wrong. We're not bothered at all by anything. We're above all that emotion stuff. Or we're gonna fawn, which is people please. We're going to try and make everybody laugh and feel good, and we're gonna make sure everybody's comfortable. That's actually a stress response. These are all stress responses that we learn when we're in childhood and we're around adults who don't have good emotional regulation, and we either fight them, we flee from them, we try and hold ourselves still so they don't notice us, or we try and make them feel good about themselves. And we shouldn't have to be doing that as a child, but unfortunately that happens. And then we bring these coping mechanisms, these stress responses, into our adult life, right? So again, to fawn is to people please. It's a trauma response. And if you find yourself falling into that particular habit or pattern, and you are seeing a therapist, you might want to discuss that with them, because you might have a legitimate reason to fight or flee, but fawn is, that's typically a self-protection that can end up being quite self-sacrificing, which can be detrimental to your own well-being. So again, but this is what our body does, because our brain doesn't know the difference between a real or perceived threat. But through mindfulness and breathing and some other techniques, we can slow down our response and then hopefully, divert away from it. It'll take us a while to learn it. This is a lifelong practice to figure out how to regulate and manage your stress. But the stress that you feel is real, and it is, right? The stressors in the society, your family and at work are real. It's impacting your body, that's real. How it impacts us, we have some say in that. So let's talk about what are some of the signs of stress, right? So I did see go by in the chat box some issues with motivation. Well, that's a sign of stress. If you have changes in your mood, that's oftentimes a sign of stress. Changes in your sleep pattern, in your energy level, not prioritizing sleep and getting a good night's sleep is definitely going to impact your overall energy as well as your mood and so many other things. Your weight. Right, getting good sleep helps you regulate your hormones and your weight. There's so many things that sleep is attached to. Might be some changes in functioning. You might find yourself withdrawing, and then you might also find that you're having changes in your behaviors and thoughts. So a decrease in motivation might, if you're just not finishing tasks. Changes in the mood, you might just start snapping at people, right? You find yourself acting very differently. Changes in functioning, you might not be able to complete daily tasks. You might not be able to focus when you're in meetings, right? So these are things that you might already be, dealing with. But just so you know, like, this is what stress looks like. We don't need to judge it. We don't need to problematize it. It just is, right? Stressors exist. Stress is happening in the body, right? And this is how we know we're in a stressful situation. So we could just pay attention to it without judging it. So here are there's so many things. You can go again on the internet and look at some stress management strategies or techniques. These would be considered the most popular, the most commonly used, which would be, we need to give ourselves breaks. We need to give ourselves breaks in a temporal sense, like we need to take time out from our day to do something that we consider pleasurable, that's a break from the monotony or the busyness of our day, the stress of our day. But we also need to give ourselves a break sort of mentally and emotionally and maybe even metaphorically, like give ourselves a break, like let yourself off the hook. I don't know if anybody's told you yet, but you're not perfect. Sorry to break the news, but either am I. And so we just need to start giving ourselves more breaks around becoming, being perfectionists. There's all kinds of different things we can do around exercise, right? We take walks, we can stretch, we can lift weights, we can swim, whatever it is you want to do, bounce up and down on a trampoline. Any form of exercise is just going to be good because it gets your circulatory system, right, your blood moving, and it gets your brain activated and endorphins and happy hormones flying through your system. It just makes us feel better, and it reduces stress. Smiling and laughing. It turns out that if you look straight up at the sky or at your ceiling and you smile really big, it releases oxytocin. If you laugh, it releases oxytocin. If you're involved in a pleasant experience with somebody and a loving exchange, it releases oxytocin. And this is a great hormone for just helping us feel better, right? Our overall well-being. If you've never heard of it, I highly recommend watching some laughter yoga videos on the internet. It's good for core muscle development or strengthening and toning, but it's also really good to just, give yourself a break and also get some exercise and laugh and smile. Because it's really silly and you look stupid and makes you feel good. We can also get social support. So we can do that through, our peer group. We can do that through virtual groups now. We can do that through family, if that's a place for us, through work groups, whatever it is, we just reaching out, especially for those of us who have been disconnected from our workplaces or disconnected from our family because we can't travel, right? We've even lost people over the last year and a half with COVID and other things. So societal unrest, all the things that are happening, right? We can reach out for social support. And then if you're interested, and you haven't already tried meditation, you might check it out. And there's like, I don't know, dozens of kinds of meditation, which I think is good news, because if one kind of meditation doesn't work for you, try another one and another one and another one until you find one that does work for you. One where you have to sit, one where you stand, one where you're focused on a flame, one where you use a mantra. There's so many different kinds of meditations or mindfulness practices. My particular favorite one is called mindful dishwashing. Look that up. I think there's a HuffPost article on it. When I wash my dishes, I do it as mindfully as possible, and I don't judge myself when my mind drifts, right? That's the main point about mindfulness, is not to judge yourself if your mind drifts. Just recognize it and bring it back. So meditation or mindfulness practices or breathing techniques, right, for stress management. So when we talk about sleep, as important as sleep is, I'd love to know what your sleep habits are. So if you could just use the numbers you see there, 1 through 7, how would you rate your sleep habits, right? Are you at number 1, sleep? What's that? I'm an insomniac. 2, do you sleep like a baby? 3, it takes me hours to fall asleep. 4, I wake up feeling tired. 5, I can't sleep more than 4 to 5 hours a night. 6, I get 7 to 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep nearly every night. And 7, I'm usually on my mobile phone, iPad, or PC, or watching TV right up to bedtime. Some people will have more than 1, so please, right? So please, so let's put it in there. Let's be as transparent as possible. Let everybody see how terrible our sleep habits are. Right, so thank you everybody for participating in that. So that's just good for you to know, right? That there is a wide range of sleep patterns and sleep habits. But sleep hygiene is something that you can also look up on the internet. There's some significant do's and don'ts when it comes to sleep. So for those of you who selected, what is it, number 7, where you're on your phone, your iPad, or TV right up to bedtime, what you're doing, unless you've turned off the blue light, you're exposing yourself to blue light. And when you expose yourself to blue light, your optic nerve registers that, and it releases cortisol into your body. And that cortisol is an activating hormone. What you want to do is remove the blue light, dim the lights as much as possible in your home, so your body goes, oh, it's time to start going to get sleepy. Let me release melatonin, right? So do's and don'ts around sleeping. Definitely look up sleep hygiene on the internet if you are having trouble with sleep, because there's a lot of ways. I mean, I do a whole hour-long workshop just on sleep alone. It's that important. Sleep science. There's a book called Why Do We Sleep? I highly recommend you read that book about the science of sleep. It's very informative, and it should give you some really useful techniques and tools that you can start using immediately to start getting a better night's sleep. But we also have to remember to have fun, right? We need to be able to have fun in our lives, right? As much as we think the world is falling apart and it's chaotic and people are doing wrong things and people are sick, and we still have to have fun. We have to have a sense of relaxation, respite, fun in our lives. Right? If it's with a child, if with the parent, with a partner, with a colleague, we have to have some fun in our lives. So I'd love to know what it is you do for fun. Let's see it in the chat box. What do you do for fun? Excellent. Pickleball, love it. So a lot of outdoor stuff, that's great. A lot of things with movement. Excellent. Yeah, getting outdoors is good, right? For people who spend a lot of time indoors. So we also have video game playing, right? That's a good stress relief for people. That's also just a good diversion, right? Escapism, whatever, right? Give yourself a break, have some fun, and keep doing that, right? Keep doing that. Make sure to keep having fun. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we do to get in our own way, right? So there's stressors out in the world. There's strains in our life in many ways, right? In our personal and professional life, we're dealing with, all the different things that are happening in the world. But there are things that we add on to that, right? We layer into that. And one of the things that we do, a lot of us, is we have what's called learned helplessness, right? And so we interpret the events in our lives in typically one of these three ways. We either personalize them, we give too much attention to the pervasiveness of things, or we are locked into thinking things have permanency, right? So we lose perspective, right? When we personalize things, when we think things are happening to us rather than things are out there, right? When we think that things are pervasive, it's like something specific might be happening. There might be an anecdotal thing that you can point to that's happening to you or somebody. That doesn't mean it's universal, but we universalize things, right? Or another way to say it is we catastrophize, and I'll talk about that. That's a cognitive distortion. And then we think things are more permanent than they really are. And then we keep them. Something may have passed, but we're still holding on to it, right? And so basically the key is to not wear rose-colored glasses, but also not to think that the world is coming to an end, right? To be what is called a flexible optimist, right? To basically see the world accurately, react appropriately to it, right? Using what would be like the right explanatory style, meaning is it really happening to you, or is it happening to people you know? Right, getting some distance from it a little bit. Is it something that's happening everywhere to everyone? I remember talking with somebody recently, and I said, "What's going on for you?" And they said, I'm just having a really hard time. And I said, "Really, what's going on?" They said, "Oh, it's just everything all the time, everywhere." And I was like, oof, like, I mean, technically that's just not true, right? Like, but they're taking it all on, right? They're not able to be flexible and optimistic about things. And that's all within our control. If we're not going to be flexibly optimistic, we're going to kind of get into a slump, like you see that poor little elephant there, and think we're going to become pessimists. And we're gonna all of a sudden we're gonna have apathy. So, this learned helplessness, if you're in therapy, you can discuss learned helplessness with your clinician to see if that's something you might be struggling with. You can do more reading on it, right? Because this is something that is a fairly common trap that we can fall into. So I'm doing just an introduction to some topics, so you'll have to do much more digging into things on your own. But learned helplessness is something to pay close attention to if that is something that you're dealing with. Another thing, I mentioned it just briefly about cognitive distortions, that we have the ability to reframe our thoughts. We can change the way we see things, right? So you can see on this on the screen there how the person just cut off, like, no, it's not unfeasible. It is feasible. It is attainable. It is possible. It is achievable. We can hold ourselves in these cognitive distortions that I can't achieve, I can't attain, it's impossible. But that means then that's part of that learned helplessness. We are holding ourselves back. We might have to get out of the relationship we're in. We might have to leave the job we're in. We might have to make some really tough choices. But we always have choice. We might just not like the choices we have, and we might not like the short-term outcome, but ultimately the better outcome, if you're in charge of your own life, is that you're going to have a better life, right? Because your stress level and your anxiety level should be reduced if you're taking charge, right? So cognitive reframing is a process that we can go through to just shift our thoughts. Right? So if we're confronted with a situation, we can look at it and say, oh, it's grim, it's impossible, but we can reframe it to say, oh, well, I don't like it. I feel uncomfortable having to confront this. I don't like having this conversation. Those are realisms, right? Those are true statements about how you're perceiving it, but it's not an impossibility. It's not an end of the world kind of thing that's happening. We just fall into that trap of thinking that it is the end of the world when it's not. So cognitive reframing, this is dealing with cognitive distortions. The therapists who help in this area or coaches would be those who are focused on cognitive behavioral therapy. They teach you how to challenge these cognitive distortions. And here's just a few of them on the screen. I'm not going to read all those details, just so if you want to look them up. What are cognitive distortions? Three that I'll point out. One is all or nothing thinking, right? The thought that someone, something, or some situation can be only all good or all bad, all true or all untrue, right? It's one or the other, when life is much more nuanced and complex than that, right? It's not all good, all bad, all true, all untrue. Another would be magical thinking, right? Magical thinking is believing that an object, an action, or a circumstance that you're in is not logically related to a course of events that can influence your outcome, right? So if you're not getting enough sleep and you're drinking a lot of alcohol and you're missing work, and then you get upset because you got laid off, it's sort of like, well, that's magical thinking, right? We contribute to our outcomes in many different ways. Not always, of course. There are things outside of our control sometimes, but thinking that how we're acting and how we're seeing the world, and then that outcome that happens, thinking that you not being able to see the connection between the two would be considered magical thinking. And then the next one I'll highlight is catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is when something happens that we don't like, and then we say, oh, it's the worst thing ever. It's terrible. I can't go on, right? We turn an unfortunate circumstance into a catastrophe. This is a cognitive distortion. This is something we're doing in our own brains. This is not what's actually happening in our world. That's how we're interpreting what's happening in our world. So again, cognitive distortions, you can reframe your thoughts, and a cognitive behavioral therapist would be ideal for you if you feel like cognitive distortions are a place where you are getting stuck. So again, to everyone or just to me as a host / panelist, if you don't want to divulge this information, but just the answer is either yes, no, or unsure. Do you engage in one or more cognitive distortion on a regular basis, right? Yes or no, unsure. Yeah, it's actually really common. It's just a human thing. Don't judge yourself, right? No shame, no harm, no foul. It's just what we do. But the good news is we can stop doing it. We can stop doing it. So let's talk a little bit about burnout. Burnout is defined as physical and mental exhaustion, experiencing a sense of dread at work, having frequent feelings of cynicism, anger, irritability. The World Health Organization has now classified burnout as an occupational hazard. That's how impactful burnout is. It's definitely pervasive in our society. It is something that is pervasive, but again, burnout is something that is avoidable, manageable, and treatable, so to speak, like in a non-clinical way. So what causes burnout? There's a bunch of things that cause burnout, but I just highlighted 2 on the slide there. Feeling out of control at work or home, right? Feeling out of control. That can cause burnout because we're getting all upset, right? And so if we feel like we're out of control, then everything at work and or at home is going to seem more difficult, more time consuming, weighing more heavily on us, right? Emotionally, physically. And then being asked to complete tasks that conflict with who you think you are. In the military, we would call this moral injury, even in Department of Veterans Affairs, right? Moral injury, that's when you're being asked to do something that you feel violates your moral or ethical code, right? Your religious or spiritual codes, right? Your values. So when people are asking you to do things that feels wrong to you and you feel like you're compelled to do them, you feel like if you don't do it, you're going to lose your job. And if you lose your job, you're going to lose your housing. And if you lose your housing, right, it's a domino effect that can cause burnout, right? So moral injury is something that some of you might want to look into because it's very real, especially for people with trauma backgrounds. So how can we deal with burnout? There's a lot of ways to deal with burnout. I can't focus too much on everything to do with burnout, but we need to speak up, right? We need to take time off. We need to find ways to, manage our schedules. We're going to be talking about some of those things in a little bit, but we need to be able to speak up about our concerns, and we need to be able to restructure our work, whether it's our physical environment, our work schedule, something, right? Otherwise, what's going to happen is, because burnout is an occupational hazard, you're going to be able to go and get a letter from a doctor, and you're going to be able to take workers' comp for burnout, right? It's recognized as an occupational hazard. So that means it's probably covered by workers' comp. So, and we don't want people doing that, right? We want people who can stay at work. And if people really need the time off, it should be for, not because they're burning out at work. Our employers should be providing much more of a safety net for us to not get to burnout. So we need to tell them what's going on with us, because some people, especially in the last 18 months, they're dealing with their illness or other people's illness, meaning physical illness, maybe aggravation with their mental illness, maybe an uncertainty or instability in their job. Maybe if you're parenting, you had your kids home for a long time. If you're like me, you had a parent with dementia while you're trying to work. I mean, we don't all have to burn out as a result of that. There are ways to mitigate that, but if we find that we're getting closer to that, we should speak up about it. We also need to and can nurture our relationships and adopt more self-care habits, and we can focus on our hobbies, right? We can do things that we enjoy doing, like that horseback riding, like that kayaking, like those hikes that people were mentioning, some of those things you do for fun. We need to do more of those things. And we need to be able to say no to new tasks. Right? If you have the capacity and the capability to say no to things or partially say no, now's the time, right? And we'll talk a little bit about boundary setting, right? Some boundary setting. I also want to talk a little bit about compassion fatigue and ambiguous loss. Again, I'm just touching on some things because there's so many important elements to dealing with anxiety and burnout and uncertainty that I want to give you as many different things as possible so that you can take these and look into them more on your own. So compassion fatigue is something we talk a lot about in social work because basically we suffer from compassion fatigue as people when we're taking on the suffering of other people. So if you're in a work environment where you're the caregiver, the caretaker, the care provider, either that's your role or that's just the role you've taken on with your family, with your friends, you're the one everybody comes to, and all this heaviness that you're taking on. If you're not finding a way to connect with other people and get some stress management, you're going to probably develop compassion fatigue. And the problem with compassion fatigue is that it can lead to not only the burnout, but total apathy. And then it's like we can't even see or feel or hear other people's suffering. And then that's not going to be good because to them, we're going to be disconnected. We're going to be cold. We're going to be unloving, right? This can definitely get in the way of our relationships with our children, with our partners, with our parents, with our colleagues, with our friends, right? So paying attention to how much you're taking on and how much you're giving to other people and how much you're giving to yourself, right? Remember that old adage, right? If you've ever flown on an airplane, what do they say every single time in those safety, talks? You put on your oxygen mask first. We have to remember to do that, or else we will have compassion fatigue. So please do look into that. Talk to somebody if that's something you're dealing with. You can probably look on the internet and find all kinds of books and webinars and videos about it if this is something you really want to get some more information and some help around. And ambiguous loss, I just want to briefly mention, most people are familiar with the grief that comes from loss, right? You lose a job, you lose a partner, somebody dies, you're leaving adolescence and you're going into a young adulthood, right? There's the grief and the transition process that we all go through it's easily demarcated, right? We can see it, lost a job, got a divorce, someone died, right? That's very clear. That's clear and concrete loss. Ambiguous loss happens when there's no closure, right? There's no clear understanding of what's happened, right? So think about it this way. Let's say, when you were a kid, you had one of your parents was in the military and they went off, right? They got deployed. They went somewhere else in the country or the world. They're gone, but they're not dead. They're just away. And how do you process that? That's a very difficult thing to process. This is ambiguous loss, right? Yeah, it is being estrangement would be a good example. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Then estrangement, right? It's like there's no real unclear understanding, right? So infertility, right? You haven't lost a child. You just can't have one physically, right? On your own. You need medical assistance. People feel loss around that issue, right? Somebody disappearing. My father has dementia. He's still alive. I can see him. I can talk to him. My father's gone. The man I knew as my father is gone. That's a loss, but it's an ambiguous loss because I see him every week, right? So there's ambiguous losses. There's a book specifically on that topic. It was actually written in the 1970s. It's not that, right? So this is the concept. So if you feel like maybe you are dealing with some of these issues, you might want to talk to somebody about it. Yeah, I mean, most people have never heard about it. It's even though it's been around as long as it has. So I think the book is called Ambiguous Loss. Yeah, I think that's literally the name of the book. So I said earlier that, we have a lot of choice in how we respond to things. And so one of the things that we have choice about is how we can regulate our own emotions, right? So emotions are just natural, right? Emotions kind of come up, sort of like build, sort of like a wave in the ocean, builds and builds and builds, and then it comes up, right? And then it crashes, and then it goes to shore, and then it pulls back, and the cycle just repeats, right? Nobody, it's like, unless it's a tsunami, nobody's really complaining about that. So emotions are kind of similar to that. They sort of ebb and flow like the waves of the ocean. And from time to time, and maybe even more often than time to time of late, we get a tsunami, right? An emotional tsunami in our lives. And so there are things that we can do to help us regulate those emotions. They're going to come up, they're going to be distressing, but we can regulate them. If you're having trouble regulating your emotions, and you are in therapy, or you'd like to be in therapy around this, a dialectical behavioral therapist specializes in helping people learn how to navigate through emotional distress, how to regulate your emotions. So some strategies would be doing some mindfulness practice, doing attention shifting, literally just shifting your attention elsewhere, like maybe a grounding technique, right? The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can taste, 3 things you can hear. I'm doing it out of sync, but because it's not right in front of me. But there are things we can do to shift our attention to something else, right? Divert, compartmentalize. We can focus on forward thinking, right? Forward looking, and not the moment, right? With mindfulness, we're focused on the moment. Sometimes we need to go outside the moment because the moment is too distressful. We can also do some positive self-talk, that reframing of our cognitive distortions. We can do that. And we can learn how to do that through very clear, precise techniques, even in workbooks that you can get just online or from a therapist. And then we also have to figure out how to call upon our better self, right? We need to ask ourselves, what would my better self do, right? In moments where our emotions are so strong, feel so out of control, we have to remember we can realign ourselves, realign our actions to match our values. But we might have to do some mindfulness or attention shifting, before, because we might be in too high of a distress, right? So emotional regulation, if this is something you have a lot of difficulty with, a DBT or a dialectical behavioral therapist might be somebody that you want to look into, or maybe even get a book, a DBT workbook, or talk with a coach who does some DBT work, or go to a DBT group where everybody in the group is practicing these skills. This is something we can do. Emotions are natural. They're going to come. We don't want to stop. We don't want to plug up emotions. We want emotions. We just don't want to be so dysregulated that we can't get out of bed, or we can't be in relationship with people. We can't speak kindly or think well of others, right? That's when it's gone too far, and we need to figure out how to regulate that, right? So in the chat box, two questions I'm going to ask you. The first question is, do you find it difficult to regulate your emotions? Again, you can send this to everybody or just me, just yes or no. Do you find it difficult to regulate your emotions? Yes or no? And then what topic really sets you off? Just one or two words. What topic really sets you off? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of politics. Yeah, rudeness. Your brother. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. So for some people, it's like these sort of societal or universal things, you know, like sexism, versus some people are like, no, it's my relationship with my brother, right? So, you know, some of these are external things and some of them are more internal because they're happening. And then there's the direct result of how you feel, how that sexism out there impacts you directly, right? So there's different levels to all this, but thank you for participating in that. Again, if you find that you are completely dysregulated on a regular basis and you'd like to become more regulated in how you manage your emotional distress, a DBT or dialectical behavioral therapist might be a good option for you. So let's talk a little bit about balancing work and family, especially we're still, for the most part, in a pandemic. A lot of us are still working out, or you know, we're dealing with people who are sick, or you know, a lot of things are happening right now. So there are some things that we can do, right? We can set boundaries, right? We need to establish uninterrupted time to work, right? So if you're working from home or working in the office, you can do things like maybe mute notifications. If you're working from home like I do now, you know, setting up a place in the home that's just for work. I have like a secretary's desk. I put everything in it at the end of my workday. I close it up and I walk away. I don't have to see it, right? Maybe you have a private room where you can do that. Maybe you can put one of those like room divider screens up. Set some boundaries between your work life and your family life so that you're not constantly doing your work. You're not constantly checking your emails or your texts. Find some balance there, right? We need to prioritize self-care, whatever that means for people, right? There's a difference between self-comforting behaviors like getting a massage or you know, going to see a movie or you know, talking with friends. Those are comforting things, but those don't deal with the root cause, which is what self-care is more for, which would be like doing the stress management techniques, applying sleep hygiene techniques, you know, limiting alcohol and drugs, right? Things that are going to get in our way of getting a good night's sleep and therefore our mood regulation and our emotional well-being. We need to be able to negotiate and navigate the expectations that everybody has of us, our boss, our peers, the people that report to us, if we have kids, that we're, you know, whomever we're dealing with, right? The homeowners board, whatever we're dealing with, we need to be able to negotiate and navigate through these expectations and set limits on those things. Being able to say no when we can, fully or partially, is going to be really, really helpful. And then tapping into our support system. You know, I've said this a couple times already. You know, if you're withdrawn, if you're isolated, tapping into some sort of in real life or virtual discussion, even if it's just a hiking group. It doesn't have to be like a therapy group. It could just be peer support as well. So, you know, please do. You know, these are just starters for how you can start to carve out some work-life balance. So let's dig deeper into a few of those. So setting boundaries, right? So there's different kinds of boundaries we have in our life that we can be attentive to, because we need to identify what our boundaries are, and then we need to establish them, and then we need to maintain them. So what are your physical boundaries? And this is going to be different for every person, right? We need to figure out what our boundaries are. We all have moral boundaries, right? What are your morals? What's your moral compass? What's your values? Everybody has different ones. We're influenced by our upbringing, our culture, our spirituality, our religion, our family, right? We're influenced in so many ways. And so everybody has a different moral code, right? And then we have emotional boundaries that we need to be paying attention to. And then financial, right? People that are abusing us financially, or if people expect us to pay for everything, right? So we have to be able to set limits around or boundaries around these areas of our life. So one, we have to identify our boundary, right? And then we need to determine what our values are, right? So the best way to do that is you can, go on the internet and look up, what are my core values, or how to define my values, and take some little assessments, some quizzes, and find out. If you can't just quickly rattle off what your values are, then you can go and find out, like, how can you figure out, like, what do you really value? Because most of us find out what we value when something happens that violates our value system, our moral code, and we push back against it. But we can get ahead of that by knowing what they are beforehand, right? And so finding out what your unique personal values are, and then establishing your boundaries from there. Who you will not or will invite into your home, who you will or won't, enjoy your holidays with. These are important things to know, right? We can start simple with setting boundaries, right? Don't get too overwhelmed with the pendulum swinging the other way and saying, well, that person's out and I'm quitting my job today. And right, like, we need to do it in a simple and not overwhelming and not too big of a way, right? So for example, some people might do things like they'll remove their Facebook app from their phone because that's a boundary they want to establish. I don't want to see anything Facebook oriented on my phone. Or they might remove notifications for every email that pops into their email inbox, right? So that's a kind of boundary. They might decide who they will and won't spend time with, because that's boundaries around their moral, and their value system. So you have to figure out what they are for you. And then identify them, establish them, and then maintain them. And this is a lifelong practice, because as soon as you start establishing your boundaries, there are going to be all kinds of people surrounding you that are going to be like, oh, really? And they're going to want to poke at them, and they're going to want to challenge you on them. But they're yours. You get to have them, and you don't need to debate or defend them. It's your life, your boundaries. They're valid, Be at peace with your boundaries. Be at peace with your boundaries. Other people might not like them, and that's not your problem, right? So there will be consequences when you establish boundaries, right? Because you're going to assert there will be consequences, but there could be consequences for those people who are pushing back on them too. So just know that, right? Just know that you can do that. And then you can practice some self-awareness, right? When you're aware of your thoughts and feelings and what you're doing, right? Focus on yourself. Don't be too worried about what everybody else is doing on the planet, in your country, in your state, in your city, in your county. We can focus all of our energies on what every other person is doing or not doing, but the only person we have control over is ourselves. So we can focus on ourselves. And for a lot of us, that's a really counter narrative. Most of us are raised in a society that says that's selfish. I don't think it is. And I think a lot of people don't think it is. We need to be able to know what our boundaries are. We need to be able to do self-care. We need to put on our oxygen masks first. So you have full permission to do that. But it's very, very difficult to set boundaries. Very, very difficult. So question for you in the chat box. Is it difficult for you to set boundaries in your life? Yes or no? Is it difficult for you to set boundaries in your life? Yes or no? Mostly yeses, of course, because that's most common. I'm glad to see some no's. For those of you who are saying no, so you don't have any difficulty setting them, but do you have any difficulty maintaining them, dealing with all the consequences of setting those boundaries? That's right, struggling to enforce them, that's right. Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear that once it's set in stone. That to me, that's almost like an impossibility. I can't even fathom that human beings are following your boundaries as if they're set in stone. So you must be surrounded by people who have a lot of integrity. So I'm very happy for you, because that's fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, a lot of people feel guilty and or shame around setting boundaries because it feels selfish. You were taught to believe that it's selfish. So let's move on. Let's talk about mindfulness. I've already mentioned it, of course. It's being aware of and paying attention to what is occurring in the present moment without judgment, right? So we have a lot of distractions in our life. And so we need to figure out ways to reduce those distractions for periods of time throughout our day, perhaps going beyond minimizing them and completely removing them, finding an opportunity to do that. And this without judgment is really key, because a lot of times people will say, oh, I can't meditate. I tried. My brain doesn't shut off. And I say to them, well, the good news is the brain will never shut off. The brain shuts off when you die. Your brain will never shut off. So for those of you who think the goal of meditation is to shut off your brain, good news is, nope, that's not it. What it is trying as much as possible to best pay attention. Pay attention if you're doing mindful dishwashing, paying attention to the weight of the thing that's in your hand, the feel of the flow of the water on your hands, the temperature of the water on your hands, the smell of whatever soap it is you're using, right? If you're taking a walk, if you're sitting and you're crossing, like the image, you're doing the old-fashioned Om kind of meditation, it's noticing, oh, my knees really hurt. Oh, my back hurts. I got a headache. Oh, what am I making for dinner, right? And then saying to yourself, there I go. There I go being distracted. There I am judging. And then just bring yourself back. So just recognize and notice you're doing it, but without the judgment, like, I'm a bad person. I don't know how to do this right. I can't do anything right. Like, we need to get outside of that, right? Right. Well, if while you're meditating, you're falling asleep, it's like, well, good, fall asleep. But if you want to do mindfulness practice and not fall asleep, then just do a moving meditation or moving mindfulness, right? Take a walk, wash the dishes, make some tea, do guided meditation where you're hearing somebody talking about the beautiful ocean or the tropical island or the forest, So you can do, you can do a lot of different types of meditations or mindfulness. If you don't want to be falling asleep, like, it's not like you're doing this when you're laying in bed trying to go to sleep. If you're at work and you're trying to just be still and you're falling asleep, then try a different practice for that time of day. We can do certain things around mindfulness while we're at work, right? Whether it's in the office or at home or out in nature. I mean, maybe you're a park ranger, I don't know, right? So we can find ways to disconnect from our work, even if it's just for moments at a time, disconnect, right? Like, when you got up to go to the bathroom, don't take your phone with you and check your text while you're in the toilet, We can pay attention to our work tasks. We can figure out, what can maybe be put onto the next day, or maybe things we can delegate to other people. If we're doing mindfulness practices, whether it's at home or at work, mindfulness is a stress management and stress release technique that then also can improve our performance in the workplace. And so ultimately, a lot of us, that's what we want to do. And so, right. And then we also need to give ourselves a break from our screens, because we have screen fatigue. We got to differentiate. Are you mindful or mindful? Is your mindful or are you mindful, right? There's a big difference there. See, there's so many things. I'm already running out of time. I really apologize. If you're a working parent, right, there are some things that you can do. Figure out if there's a way you can make some changes in your schedule, set your own expectations, set boundaries again. Be gentle with yourself and your kids, right? Right, because kids are going through this too. So we need to find ways to not let their stress become our stress and vice versa. If you're a caregiver for somebody, right, there's lots of things that you can do, but establishing a routine, creating some boundaries, minimizing interruptions, right? There's a lot of things you can do. There's some similarities, right? If you're caring for a sick partner or an elderly parent, special needs kid, right? These are some tips for you. I'm curious, are you currently in the chat box, are you a primary caregiver for an adult, not a child, an adult with special needs? And if so, do they live with you? Do they live with you? Okay, so not a lot of you, not a lot of you. So let me just wrap up by saying that, you know, we hear a lot of times, you know, people are anxious, people are depressed, people are burned out. There's a lot of trauma going on in the world. People are internalizing that trauma. These cognitive distortions that we have are because we're dealing with trauma. We might have early life trauma, or what they call adverse childhood experiences, which is a study you can look up at the CDC, the ACE study, adverse childhood experiences. But just know that, you know, this is something we talk about a lot with veterans and military people, is that there's also such thing as post-traumatic growth, right? That there is the other side of things. And this image you see on your screen, this is a Japanese art form called kintsugi. And what it is they make a beautiful piece of pottery and then they break it and then they put it back together with gold. And it's just to show that, you know, even in our brokenness, there's beauty, right? Post-traumatic growth. So what happens a lot of times for people after a really traumatic experience, and it takes time to get to this place, right? They might have more intimate, warmer relationships with people because they've broken through and they've experienced something. They gain some empathy, some compassion, right? Maybe a greater appreciation for life because what? Now they're out of the coma. Now they're not paralyzed anymore. Now they're out of that abusive relationship, and it takes some time to get there. This could be months or years after the trauma, but just know that there's not an end with trauma, right? It keeps going. New possibilities, right? There's not a lot of time for questions. I'm already 1 minute over, but we did start 3 minutes after the hour, so I fit it in there. But you've said so many things in the chat box, and I want to appreciate you and say thank you to you for engaging, for being here. I hope that you all start getting better night's sleep, getting more established around your boundaries, challenging your cognitive distortions, anything that you need to do to minimize the stressors and strains that you're dealing with in your life. Please do. And you can see my email is on the screen. If you need any of those resources, please do reach out to me. I hope you get a copy of these slides. If not, email me and I will send you a copy. It's been wonderful. Enjoy the rest of your summit, everybody. Thank you so much. I love it. Thank you for all those kind comments. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. I'm glad it was helpful.